to this online event of ELTE Latin America Research Center. My name is Béla Soltész. I am assistant professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Department of International Relations and European Studies. And I'm really happy to welcome here two distinguished guests, José Sieber and Tissera Luna. And especially I'm happy because we started to organize this lecture more than a year ago. So it was set exactly 1 year ago on the 21st of March, or the 25th of March, perhaps, last year, what was the original date. And then the coronavirus outbreak and everything, all the education, remote learning and everything. So we had to postpone it to some undefined future date, and we were just postponing and postponing and postponing it. And finally, I decided to organize this event online. Migration is a big issue in one of the big topics in current Latin American society and politics. So that was definitely a topic which I wanted to bring in this lecture series that we have at ELTE. And actually, there are different migration systems in the Americas, and all of them are quite important to study. Obviously, there is one huge migration system, which is the Central America, Mexico, United States migration system. Another one coming from the Caribbean, most importantly to the US. And also a completely new story, the Venezuelan migration crisis, which we started to become also important a couple of years ago. But there is also important internal migration in the case of Colombia, but also in the case of other conflict areas. So different migration systems should be definitely studied. Now the trends are analyzed in literature and in academia from different points of view. For example, the economic point of view or political point of view, security policy point of view. But now we are going to discuss the issue from one particular angle, which is the human rights perspective. And we have our two guests for today, José Sieber, who is a lawyer from Brazil. He's Senior Staff Development Officer with UNHCR Global Learning and Development Center in Budapest. And he has served with the UNHCR in different protection capacities in Latin America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And José is going to present an overview of the major displacement situations affecting Latin America, while also pointing to regional legal principles and standards informing operational responses at the local level as adopted by the Inter-American System of Human Rights. And his presentation will be followed by Tissera Luna's presentation. Mara is cultural anthropologist and policy analyst from Argentina. And currently she's monitoring and evaluation consultant for the Colombia Inspire coordination course Lab, which is a collaboration between the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children at the University of Edinburgh. And in her presentation, she will be focusing on Colombia, which is a country that has suffered one of the world's worst internal displacement crises associated with conflict and violence over the past 5 decades. So we are speaking about more than 5 million internally displaced people. So that would be in the focus of Mara's presentation, also briefly mentioning the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. This online event or discussion will be recorded and published on the YouTube channel of the Latin America Research Center. And the basic idea is that we will have 2 short presentations, approximately 20-25 minutes each, after which we will give the floor to the audience. So I would like to ask everybody to please mute your microphone if you haven't done so. And you will be able to ask the presenters and to engage in the discussion after the 2 presentations. So first, José, the floor is yours. And yeah, if you want to share your screen for your presentation, feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Béla, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like also to say how much happy I am to be able to see again and meet our colleague Mara. Thank you all for taking the time for joining us today. As mentioned by Bella, the idea is to provide you with an overview of the major displacement situations we're now facing in the region. Let me just share my screen with you. I think it should come. Yeah. So the idea is to look at what is defined there as a displacement situations, and by displacement, I'm making reference to the concept of forced migration. So the movement of people that is being caused mainly by violence, persecution, conflict, and in the case of Venezuela, some wider structural conditions being affecting the country. We will basically look at two situations, two sub-regional situations in the context of the Americas. We would first look at the Venezuela situation, and we will then move quickly to the situation affecting countries in Central America, mostly El Salvador and Honduras, and the displacement of Central Americans towards Mexico and the US. I will be sharing some maps, some information on slides, but I will also share with you some websites where those of you who are interested in getting to know more details on the situation on the ground, more details around the impact of these different situations. So you can also take a look and do some follow-up research. I think that for us to start, I would like to position Latin America in the global context of forceful or forced displacement or forced migration. It is interesting to see that by the end of June 2020, according to the UN, Latin America or the Americas, also Canada and the US, was hosting almost 20% of the global displaced population. So we're talking about 16 million people by the end of June in 2020, being displaced, being, if we may say, victims of forced migration in the Americas. This number is a record for the region. Never the region managed to never, I mean, the region has never recorded such high numbers in terms of people on the move. So it is, as we like to say, an unprecedented situation for the region. Out of these 16.2 million, almost 15 million are in Latin American and Caribbean countries. And this population is basically constituted by a bit more than 5 million Venezuelans that are considered as refugees, as migrants. We will talk about that. So that's really the most concerning situation when assessed from a numerical perspective. We will take a look at a map where are these 5.1 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants in the region. This situation is followed by the persistent situation of internally displaced people in Colombia. Mara will touch on that. But we also have, and this is the situation we will look after we check on Venezuela, almost 500,000 refugees and asylum seekers. So those people trying to seek recognition of their status as refugees from countries in northern Central America. As I said, the vast majority coming mainly from two countries, Honduras and El Salvador. In addition to that, there is also a most recent situation emerging in the region, and this relates to the 100,000, 110,000, again, refugees and asylum seekers fleeing Nicaragua, leaving Nicaragua, traveling towards most of them Costa Rica, but also countries in northern Central America and Mexico. Let's move on. And let's start taking a look at the situation in Venezuela. The internal social, economic, and political crisis in Venezuela continues to push people to seek protection, to seek uh, protection against very serious human rights violations, people fleeing due to shortages of food, due to the collapse of institutions and services in the country. So you have a situation where uh, more and more people from Venezuela are in need of international protection. When I say people are in need of international protection, what I mean is that people are in need of documentation, people are in need of legal guarantees allowing them not to be deported, allowing that not to be removed, allowing them not to be sent back to Venezuela. As the numbers increase, we will check the numbers. We have this map. I would also like to take you to a website where you can also look more in details on each country. This is a situation that continues to require not only the type of emergency relief response, the classic humanitarian response in terms of provision of shelter, water, sanitation, food, but also, and this is especially as a consequence of the pandemic, a more proactive policy that would allow these Venezuelans to be included into social welfare, into social protection, domestic mechanisms in the country where they are arriving. So we're talking about access to protection procedures, access to documentation that would allow Venezuelans to remain at least on a temporary basis in the countries that they are where they are arriving, documentation, um, access to livelihoods, access to mechanisms that would allow for the socio-economic integration in these countries before the pandemic and even more now after the pandemic, access to health care system, and more recently, access to mechanisms that would allow for families to be reunited. As family separation continues to be something that Venezuelans abroad, Venezuelans outside Venezuela continue to be concern. And this is also especially because of the impact of the pandemic as countries continue to restrict access, border closures continue to be implemented throughout the region. So families are being caught up in a situation of separation. Let me take you to now. I will stop sharing these and let me take you now to a website where we can look into more details. Just a second. Let me stop sharing this and share my screen again. Here, so this is an interesting website. It's called the address is r4v.info. It is a coordination platform being led by UNHCR, the United Nations, and IOM, the International Organization for Migration. This is a website where you can go and look into more details on the overall humanitarian impact of the arrival of Venezuelans in countries in the region. But what I would like to share with you is this map you see here in this corner, where you can see the figures on the presence of Venezuelan migrants and refugees in countries in the region. Colombia continues to be the most affected country. Colombia is, and these are figures. I think these figures have been updated as of end of February 2021. Sorry, early March 2021. So in Colombia, Colombia is presently hosting 1.7 million Venezuelans. Colombia is being followed by Peru with a bit more than 1 million Venezuelans, and followed by the situation in Ecuador with almost 500,000 Venezuelans. As you can see, I mean, then you have Brazil hosting 260,000 Venezuelans. We will talk about Brazil in the next slide. But what you can see here is that it is a regional situation affecting not only South America, not only the northern part of South America, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia, but you also have an increasing population in places like Chile, also almost 500,000 Venezuelans. Argentina, almost 200,000, 179,000 Venezuelans in Argentina. Also, countries in Central America, especially Panama with 120,000, and the Caribbean, where Venezuelans can be found mostly in the Dominican Republic with 114,000, but also Trinidad and Tobago, a situation of concern, a situation where you see trends of Venezuelans fleeing towards leaving Venezuela, trying to reach Trinidad and Tobago by resorting to very dangerous sea routes. Just a situation like, I mean, we have in the Mediterranean. Also, Mexico continues to host a very significant number. We're talking about a bit more than 100,000 Venezuelans in Mexico. What I think is interesting, and let me stop sharing this and go back to the slide. What I think is also interesting when it comes to Venezuela. Let me take this. Wait just a second. When you look at the map of Central America, we're talking about mainly three corridors or three exit escape routes being used by Venezuelans. First, and the most busy one, we saw the numbers. You have Colombia. This map showing us the routes, it's a bit, it's not as updated as our previous map. You see this map still talks about 1.4 million. We're now talking about 1.7 million in Colombia. But Colombia continues to be the main route used by Venezuelans, not those by those Venezuelans remaining in Colombia, but also the route being taken by Venezuelans continuing to travel, trying to reach Ecuador, trying to reach Peru, and all the way to Chile. Another route being used by Venezuela is through Brazil. There you have northern Brazil, the Brazilian state of Roraima, where the response is presently being led by the Brazilian army, who has set in motion reception mechanisms in Roraima. But what is interesting and what is also new and at the same time continues to pose additional protection risks in terms of the protection of human rights for Venezuelans on the route is the crossing of the Amazon region. This route crossing the Brazilian Amazon region is something new, and through this route Venezuelans continue to reach not just southern Brazil and move onward towards Argentina, but also countries like Bolivia or even Paraguay, countries that due to their geographical position were never really considered as host countries or countries of destination for people on the move in the region. So another dimension of the Venezuela situation is that it is now reaching out to countries that never really faced such high numbers in terms of arrivals, be it of migrants, be it of refugees and people seeking asylum. So I think this is it in relation to Venezuela. We can leave, we will have some time to discuss, and I'll be happy to answer questions and hear your own comments and reactions to this very brief overview. What I would like to do now is to move a bit towards the north, and let's go to Central America and Mexico. The second biggest, largest situation we have in the region. And what is important about the situation affecting Central America is that you have a situation of criminal violence, a situation that is being compounded by the very poor socio-economic indicators, especially in countries like Salvador and Honduras. So you have criminal violence, you have poverty, and most recently, you have disasters. You have most recently, especially in Honduras, again, an unprecedented event where, in the period of uh, 2 weeks, two hurricanes, category 5, hit the northern coast of Honduras, an area that is now by poverty, by the highest indicators on criminal violence in Honduras. So a situation that is now being exacerbated by disasters. So, as you can see, the situation in Central America is, I think, a situation where you can find mixed reasons for the displacement, not only violence, not only criminal violence perpetrated by quite sophisticated criminal actors, gangs, maras, criminal actors that have now established alliances with even more sophisticated networks of transnational crime, actors that do employ a very rough strategy of social and territorial control and causing displacement. So we are here talking about almost 400, almost 500,000 refugees and asylum seekers. The vast majority of refugees, as I said, come from El Salvador and Honduras and travel to Mexico, and then they continue their journey towards the US, causing another humanitarian situation in the border between Mexico and the US, a situation that continue to affect communities not just on northern Mexico, but also and more recently in the southern border in the US. We can talk more in detail about that situation later on. But in addition to that, you still have 320 people to 320,000 people internally displaced within El Salvador and within Honduras. So people moving from communities within their countries, again, violence, poverty, and disasters. In addition to that, the number of the Nicaraguans continue to increase out of the political crisis in Nicaragua. In addition to these two situations, and I start to close now, Bella, in addition to these two situations, I think it is important for us to highlight the persistent situation of internal displacement caused by violence within Colombia. Mara will lead you into that situation. But I just want to conclude by saying that although these situations persist and they become more serious, I think it was Secretary General Antonio Guterres who used to say when he was still the head of the UN refugee agency. I remember Secretary General Guterres saying that solutions to humanitarian situations remain political. So as we try to seek for solutions, it is very important for us to monitor, to follow up on what is happening in the region in terms of diplomatic efforts. You have different processes taking place. You have the so-called Quito process taking place around the Venezuelan situation. You have a regional framework, again, a regional framework aiming at solutions for the situation in Central America. It will be interesting for us to see what I refer to as the re-engagement of the US, especially in the context of Central America. But this is just to say, and I conclude by saying that solutions to humanitarian situations like this remain political, remain under the domain of regional, political, and above all, diplomatic process. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussions and questions. Bella, I give the mic to you before we can hear Mara. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose, for this broad overview of the main geographical areas and the main conflict zones from where displacement is going on. And as you have just mentioned, actually, this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that still the internal displacement situations, most importantly in Colombia, but also in Central American countries, continues to exist. So we were discussing it a bit before this event with Mara, that actually Mara mentioned that while, for example, the Venezuela case and the Central American case is now in the spotlight, but we still have the big problem, the big humanitarian emergency situation of internally displaced people in Colombia. So this is why Mara is going to focus her presentation on that. And with this, I would like to give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Bella, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. Of course, I am very happy to be with you here and with José. And I am going to do the presentation on internally displaced Colombia, and I will focus a little on the consequences that this has on children's rights, especially to child protection. So I am going to start with a mini definition of what is internally displaced persons. Then I am going to zoom into what is going on in Colombia. After that, I will speak about the influence or the impact that this has on children's rights as a subset of the impact that it has on vulnerable groups in Colombia in general. So the definition of IDP comes from the guiding principles on internal displacement of 1998. Colombia also has an internal law on the prevention of internal displacement, but in general, the definition that is used of internally displaced people comes from these international guiding principles that talks about persons or groups of people that have been displaced from their homes or from their places of habitual residence, and that remain in the within the borders of their countries. So they haven't crossed borders like asylum seekers or refugees. The responsibility of making sure that these people receive humanitarian aid and protection is on the state. So the state is the one who needs to take care of their citizens in general and displaced populations in particular. But in the case of displaced populations, also humanitarian organizations, the UN, NGOs, international organizations also step in to provide protection. So to protect these people from further human rights violations, but also to provide life-saving services like shelter, like water, like food. And this is exactly what happens in Colombia too. So in Colombia, you have UNHCR, you have OCHA, UNICEF, and lots of international NGOs, and also national NGOs providing these kinds of life-saving services, and some of them also trying to ensure and trying to oversee that the peace agreement from 2016 that I will mention next is applied in actuality, let's say. So, as we can see, Colombia is one of the worst situations of internal displacement based on caused by conflict worldwide. In the Americas, the country in which forced displacement numbers are the highest are the US, but because of natural disasters. In Colombia, when we talk about forced displacement, we usually talk about violence, that I am going to show you more about this. One thing about Colombia is that due to logistical reasons, it is hard for the government to keep a census of internally displaced people. So all of the figures that I'm going to mention now and that all reports mention are estimates. They are not the real numbers, but they are very good estimates. One of the reasons why there's not a registry, which is important, is that many of the internally displaced people, IDPs, are afraid of registering themselves as IDPs because they are afraid of suffering further violence because of this. And so, how many, where, and why are people displaced in Colombia? The latest complete figures that we can get are from 2019. As of the end of 2019, there were 5.5 million IDPs in Colombia. 1.5 million among them were children, according to UNICEF. The total numbers, so the historic stock of IDPs in Colombia is of 8.1 million. This is since 1985, when the unique national registers of victims of forced displacement and violence was created. So from all of those, so 8 million people that are displaced, and also the registry has found almost 10 million events of forced displacement, because usually the forced displaced people are affected by more than one event of displacement, because Colombia is what is known as a protracted situation of displacement. So the same people, the same communities might have been displaced more than once, or for instance, maybe they were displaced within rural areas from one area to the other, and then they were displaced to the big cities. So this is a really, really complex displacement situation. Where are most of the people who are displaced? There are certain areas that are more affected by displacement than others. This is a very nice map from a research that the Idea for Peace Foundation and Instituto Elcano did, where we can see where the, this is not completely updated, this is from 2018, but it is a good illustration of where the forces are, the armed forces are fighting, and where, and next I will show you where the displaced people are. Of course, there's an overlap between the regions, and I am going to leave this presentation available because I used many maps, and I think that they are very useful to understand the situation. So, why do people continue to be displaced after so many years? The civil war in Colombia started in May of 1964, so many decades ago. So one of the main moments in the past years, in the past decades in Colombian history, especially concerning the conflict, was the signature of the peace accord by the government and by the FARC. the FARC are the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, the main armed group that used to fight the government. This brought quite a lot of hope to the country, but many armed forces continued fighting the government, and also there are drug trafficking groups causing violence, situations of violence, threatening populations, killing people, and that continued to create forced displacement. And something very important that still explains forced displacement is that the root causes that brought Colombia to a conflict, to a civil conflict, continue to exist. These are related to socioeconomic inequalities, lack of opportunities to make a living in the countryside because of land property, which is a very common problem in Latin America in general, and other structural vulnerabilities that rural populations, that are the ones that are displaced, used to suffer and continue suffering. The main groups that are fighting in Colombia right now are the self-defense group, Grupo de Autodefensa, the ELN, that is the left-wing National Liberation Army, and many different splinter groups that emerged from the FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, after the peace accords, because FARC became a political party. They are a political party, left-wing political party called Comunes, but other forces that came out from FARC continue fighting and continue being guerrilla. And let's see, I have many maps with updated information. I wanted to show you the latest information so that you see where the displaced populations are. The main sectors that were affected in 2020 were Chocó and Nariño, that you can see here on the west, and then also Córdoba, El Norte de Santander, and Valle del Cauca. That is where you can see all of those big red spots. That's where the largest numbers of populations were displaced last year. In 2020 only, Nariño and Chocó, that are these places that I mentioned on the west, has 77% of all of the forced displacement events. So displacement is not happening throughout the country, and it's not happening, so it's kind of concentrated in certain areas. These are also large group displacements, so displacements that happen in en masse, let's say mass displacements, also last year. These maps also show the unequal impact of displacement in the country, but also they show that different groups are disproportionately affected by displacement. Colombia suffers from an issue that is common in Latin America, that is a huge divide between countryside and cities, especially when it comes to socioeconomic opportunities, wealth in general, access to services, even access to basic services like healthcare and education. Because the Colombian state is not so present in some certain areas of the country, this allows armed groups and drug trafficking groups to take those regions for themselves. So these are the regions where the conflict is the worst and where there are more displaced populations. There, for example, one of the ethnic groups that is the most hit by forced displacement, that are the Afro-descendant populations of Colombia. These populations make up only 7% of the Colombian population, but they make up 12% of displaced population. So they are overrepresented among displaced populations. And also they occupy the poorest sections of Colombian society. and new displacement happens all the time. So I was looking at the most updated maps, and there are new displacement events happening all the time, even during COVID, even though the government imposed relatively kind of strict restrictions, displacement continues to happen and violence continues to happen. The only thing that changed is that because of these restrictions and restrictions in movement, the figures for 2020 are not that as reliable as the ones for previous years. So here we can see a mini timeline of displacement. I started only in 2012, but the important thing is that displacement, because conflict decreased in between 2014 and 2016, also displacements had decreased because there was a ceasefire between the FARC and the government, and then it started increasing again. The important thing of this is that it never stopped. In 2020, the figure that is available is 30,000 displaced people, but most probably this figure is not accurate because of what I said before, that many people don't want to or cannot register themselves as internally displaced people, or also because of restrictions to monitor displacement. And then besides, so the number one reason for displacement, as I said before, is threats to the lives of people. So armed violence, armed groups displacing people from their towns, threats to physical security in general. But Colombia is also in a geographical location in which it is common to have floods and to have other natural disasters that bring people to evacuate or to have to evacuate or be evacuated by the government because of natural disasters, the most common being floods. Storms also, and of course, all of this, needless to say, was aggravated by COVID. So now I am going to speak a little about the effects of forced displacement in children's rights. These are the main effects, so, but I am not going to speak in detail about all of them. I will focus on forced recruitment and on family separation. That are the topics that I know the best. One of the main consequences of the whole conflict, not only of displacement, has been egregious, so really serious human rights violations against children, including arbitrary killings or extrajudicial killings, torture, disappearance, and these were perpetrated by all parties, so not only by the guerrillas, by the FARC or by ELN or the disidencias, but also by the government. Besides that, the levels of gender-based violence and violence in general are very elevated in Colombia. The fact that children go through displacement has had really bad consequences on their mental health also. So many children suffering of mental health disorders because of displacement. And as I said before, these displaced populations are usually, so there's a Venn diagram, let's say, between displaced populations and socioeconomic marginalized populations in Colombia, groups that were already in situations of vulnerability, and the fact that they are displaced aggravates those situations. Then, of course, limited access to education, which became even more limited during COVID because of the restrictions. And yeah, what I'm going to speak about now, which is family separation and forced recruitment. So regarding forced recruitment, I have some numbers here, some estimates that are that there are nearly 8,500 children victims of forced recruitment and use by armed forces in Colombia. This is an estimate by the government. These children are recruited by all of the factions that I mentioned before, so self-defense groups. the National Liberation Army, ELN, and the FARC dissidencies, and the FARC before, when the FARC used to exist. The Colombian peace agreement included some points on preventing the recruitment, the forced recruitment of children, and also making sure that they are demobilized and they are reintegrated into society and that they get some kind of reparation. So the government of Colombia has provided money for reparations to thousands of children, 3,000 children who have been victims of forced recruitment. There are many problems with these reintegration policies because usually what is done is that the children are moved to the child welfare system together with all children that are placed in the child welfare system, so in the so-called orphanages. And sometimes this is not the most effective treatment for a child who has been exposed to such horrible situations of violence and who have perpetrated violence themselves. So there are some problems with the treatment that they get. But according to the Colombian Institute of Child Welfare, 7,000 children between 2000 and today have been treated because they used to be part of armed forces. So the efforts of the Colombian government are quite large. Anyway, apart from this, so despite all of this, during 2020, children continue to be threatened to be recruited by armed forces. And there's an estimate which comes from the government itself, that is that in 2020, more than 32,000 children were threatened to be recruited. And 37 of them were between 2 and 12 years old, so really young children. And the children that are recruited are very young, so from 2 years onwards. The second topic that I wanted to focus on is family reunification and family separation, because it is common in Colombia that when families flee their homes, or while they are on the move, or while they arrive to the place where they settle down, they are separated. This is a common thing. This is a problem because of many reasons, but one of the problems is that children that are unaccompanied and separate from their carers or from their families are more exposed to violence, to forced recruitment by armed forces, to forced labor, to trafficking, and to many other children's rights violations and child protection issues. So whenever we talk about protecting internally displaced children, we also need to talk about keeping them together with their families. We hear a lot about this when it comes to the United States. So this same principle that children need to grow up in a family and that family life needs to be preserved. This comes from, so the international normative for this is the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 4, and the UN guidelines for the alternative care of children. When children cannot be reunited with their families, when the governments or organizations have made all of the possible efforts to reunite children with their families, and this hasn't been possible, some alternative care measure needs to be put in place so that the child can grow up in a safe and caring environment, so that they are not exposed to all of the risks that I mentioned before. And okay, to end up on a relatively happy note or something nice, because all of this is extremely worrying, I want to say that in the displacement context in Colombia, the international community and many government representations of the municipalities and the departments and many international NGOs and national NGOs are still collaborating and working so that children are protected and they are not exposed to exploitation and violence and abuse. So this is a positive thing that the international community and the national community of activists and children's rights activists and children's rights practitioners is very strong. So this is something to be highlighted. And That's it. Any questions that you have, you can ask me now.
Thank you so much, Mara. And I think that in the second half of this evening's event, we will give the floor to the audience. But even before that, I would like to abuse my possibilities as a moderator to give myself the floor for one question, which is connected to the topic of both of you, which is an event what happened in Colombia more than a month ago, that actually the president of Colombia decided to provide temporary protected status to all the Venezuelans currently staying in Colombia, which, as we saw from the presentation of Mara, will be adding a new layer on top of the already existing huge problem of the internally displaced people. So this 5.5 million people who are IDPs, plus the almost 2 million Venezuelans who will have the right to stay there for, if I'm not mistaken, for 10 years. So I would like to ask for your opinion about how you see the possible outcomes of this. So what do you think that what will be the effects on the situation of IDPs and on the situation of Venezuelans, this unprecedented move of providing temporary protected status to all Venezuelans?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so because it is hard for me, let's say, to foresee the future, I want to say that this is, of course, super welcome. In many Latin American countries, like where I come from, Argentina, it is common to do these kinds of amnesties for people who are living in the country irregularly. And this is great, of course, it is a great move. It was very happily welcomed by all of the international community. And I think that they are like two different separate topics, you know, so refugees, asylum seekers always need to be given rights. And of course, the government of Venezuela benefits greatly about making sure that these people can access healthcare and any kind of governmental welfare services, education. So this is super, super positive. And regarding, so it is a separate problem from the internally displaced. So I don't see how it could be affecting negatively, but an important thing is that many of those Venezuelans that are living irregularly in Colombia are also internally displaced. So many of them also become internally displaced, and this will be a great help. So giving an amnesty to them and regularizing them, giving them regular status can be of great help so that they stop becoming displaced. Usually they are in the same regions as the Colombians, so they also become displaced with them, and this could be a good way of preventing that.
Thank you very much. Jose, would you like to add something?
Yeah, no, just say, I mean, I agree with Mara. I think it's positive, and I think it's positive because, I mean, when you look at the situation of Venezuelans in Colombia, I think I've mentioned we're talking about 1.7 million people. And out of the 1.7 million people, this morning I was preparing for this presentation and this conversation, and I found an interesting article on the Spanish newspaper El País, and it was talking about, out of the 1.7 million, a bit less than 1 million, let's say 900,000 Venezuelans are in Colombia without any documentation, meaning that they are there, they exist, they are there, they are trying to access services, health services. These are families trying to enroll their kids at school. So I think the response from the government of Colombia is a positive one, because this will ensure visibility. So they will have a document, they will be able to access services. And this is also an important tool, because otherwise we're talking about almost 1 million people that are being exposed to different threats, to different situations, labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, gender-based violence. So I think that bringing these people under the light of the state, making them visible, giving them a document, is definitely a step in the right direction from different perspectives. Of course, national capacities. I think that Colombia's social services are already stretched to break point. But that's when I think, as I said, other countries in the region, donor countries in the region, have to come in and tell Colombia, don't worry, you are not alone. It is a regional problem requiring regional solutions, and therefore, support to service providers in Colombia is essential. Over.
Thank you very much. I think that's definitely one crucial and focal point here. So I'm glad that you mentioned, on one hand, this is really an important thing to bring people under the light of services that have to be provided for them, but also the limited capacities and the need for regional cooperation in this matter. And with this, I would like to give the floor to the audience, because I guess that in the past 1 hour, many of you already started to take notes and formulate questions. So please, whoever has a question, feel free to ask. I'm trying to moderate based on the raised hands, and the first person I see is István Rákóczi.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I don't know, should I say it in English or Spanish? Or
in English? We have
okay.
guests who do not speak Spanish.
All right. Sorry. So my question would be that you've just mentioned this temporary statute of protection for the Venezuelan migrants, and I think José Sieber just mentioned as well that there is like around 1 million Venezuelan without the proper documentation. And my question would be that what will happen to them in relation to the COVID vaccines? So how they will be able to receive these vaccines? How will they become eligible for these vaccines? Because it's really a tricky question, even with the documentation in hand, and without it, how do you handle this? Thank you very much.
I think we can go one by one, so we don't have to collect questions. Whoever receives a question, feel free to answer it.
Do you want me to, Mara? Would you like to?
So I am looking for some information, because Iván Duque, when the measure was announced, connected giving the amnesty to the Venezuelans so that they could get the vaccination. So this is the idea. Only that, as we all know, let's say vaccination is not going as quickly as it is here in Europe, in some Latin American countries. So I don't know what are the next steps, but the idea of the national government was to do that, to give amnesty, and then they would have access to healthcare, and then they would have access to COVID vaccination.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think yes. Yeah. No. I think the documentation is a step in the direction also of ensuring that these people are included in any vaccination program. I mean, if you, we can put ourselves in the shoes of a national health authority, and the virus will not check if you have documents before it reaches you. So it's essential that whoever is in the territory of Colombia has access to vaccination programs being considered, being designed at the national level. I'm not aware. I'm not following the vaccination plan in Colombia, but my opinion is that bringing these people into light, giving them a document, having them in the radar of national authorities is certainly something that will allow them to be included, that would allow them to be included in any vaccination program. And excluding people from a vaccination program, knowing that these people is within the territory of the state, I wouldn't take that course of action.
Okay, so to complement what José said, I got the quote by the president. Now I found it. And the problem was that on 1 week, on one moment, Duque said that only Colombians would be vaccinated, or that Colombians would be prioritized. This caused this fear, let's say, so it was not welcome. And so then he said that also Venezuela would get the vaccination, and Colombia is participating in COVAX. So Duque called for the international community to support Colombia so that everyone who is inside of the territory, so not only Colombia, but everyone who is inside of the territory can get vaccinated. So this is the plan. So as part of COVAX.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the answers.
Okay, thank you. The next person who I see raising her hand is Andrea Nivia.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to add some information maybe related to the previous question. And it's because I am from Colombia and I was listening to what you were saying. So just to give more information, as you said, of course, the new regulation with the new regulation, the Venezuelans that will be legal, we will have access to the vaccine. This is a lot of people actually, and from my perspective and experience of living in Colombia this time, this process will be low, let's say, because that there are like this 1.8 million, I think, are all around the country in areas where the government will have to intervene or provide the way to them to be regulated. So if we talk about Bogota, Medellin, let's say the big cities, maybe it would be easy, but in many regions, there are a lot of people, of course, from Venezuela as well. So this process will be slow. And okay, right now, when the government, like, let's say, did the calculations about how many vaccine are the budget that the government will have to invest on buying vaccines, there is a report that says that just the 55% of this 1.8 million well counted. So now, let's say in Colombia, there are no, we are missing like 45% vaccines for this population. But so as you mentioned also, the Colombian government has led a lot of programs and also ask for international cooperation in this topic. So I think maybe people, we will get like, of course, Colombia have the priority. Maybe the Venezuelans also will get vaccination. but it's a slow process, and in the meantime, so the regulation maybe can work. So I just wanted to add that, like, from my perspective and experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for
Thank you.
adding your thoughts. Do you want to reflect on that, Mara, Jose?
No, I agree completely with this. I think that we don't even mention it because it is so obvious, but things in Latin America happen really slowly, usually between the moment in which a government says that they are going to do something and the government in which it really happens. Many years pass by. The situation in Colombia is ultra extremely complex. So we understand that. And also this is, of course, a fluent situation. The displacement situation is completely fluent. For example, as I said before, there are displacement events all the time. And most probably this vaccination situation, despite promises, and for instance, despite promises by the international community of providing funding, I agree with, sorry, Nadia, remember the name, Andrea, sorry, Andrea, that it is going to take a really long time before Colombians are vaccinated. So I agree with that.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Vences.
Yes. Hello. So my question is, in all these cases, we're looking at how to help migrants, but what about preventing all this? What mechanisms are there that could be used to just help all these people to be able to stay at home without having to face all those horrible situations? What mechanism could we, or could the international community use to put some pressure on countries like Venezuela that are basically, it's the government of Venezuela causing this, or to help the government of Colombia to deal with the guerrillas, or the governments of Honduras to deal with the organized crime? Are there no mechanisms to attack this problem before people get displaced?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I'm so glad that I don't have to give an answer. So
thank you very
I'm
much.
looking at Jose or Mara.
Thank you very much, Bella. Vences, I think, look, I think I've mentioned by the end of my presentation that, you know, we are now dealing with the humanitarian impact of this movement of forced migration or displacement. But of course, I mean, prevention is an important component. But I think that prevention is a result of political, diplomatic efforts, international cooperation. I think that if you look around the world, I mean, and Latin America is not different. All this situation involving the massive movement of people from one country to another, or from one country to several other countries, require a regional response. I think that displacement, migration, refugee movements are situations that require a multilateral approach on the sides of states. As you said, I mean, prevention cannot be done by the country of origin alone. Prevention cannot be done by Venezuela, by Honduras, by El Salvador alone. Of course, different types of interventions are necessary to take place within these countries. Sometimes these interventions are and should be political. Sometimes these interventions can take the form of different programs on international cooperation. So I think that for the region, what is interesting for us to think when we try to understand and your question is, okay, are there precedents in the region? Perhaps there are no precedents in the region that equal to the numbers we have now in Venezuela. But massive displacement of people happened in the context of Central America in the 80s, when countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras were engulfed in internal conflicts, civil wars, and those wars caused the same problem. You had tens of thousands of Central Americans fleeing into Mexico, into Costa Rica. So, and it was interesting. I mean, if we ask our colleagues looking at the history of Latin America, the 70s and the 80s, I think these colleagues will give us a very interesting process, diplomatic process, regional talks that were, some of them addressing the humanitarian impact, but others, hard talk, were addressing the political issues. What was happening in Nicaragua? Who was involved in the war in Nicaragua? What was the situation in Guatemala? The war in El Salvador. So and I mean, and I think, you know, looking at precedents, not just because I'm a lawyer, but I also think that for us, looking at the international relations, diplomacy, precedents are useful places to go to when trying to solve problems. Back to Bella, or perhaps Mara would like also to share a few thoughts.
Yeah, this is super complex. I am not a lawyer, I am an anthropologist, and I also look at the historic causes of these kinds of things usually. And you know that in the case of Latin America, 100% of humanitarian situations throughout history are socioeconomic, have socioeconomic and political roots. So in many cases, we are talking about land ownership, okay, people who are peasants, not peasants, countryside people who want to work the land, who have no land. So this is one of the causes. This is a political issue. This could be solved by agrarian reform. I am mentioning just one example to show how complex and how political and also how dangerous from a political point of view the solutions would be in the case of Colombia, for example. But then in the case of the Northern Triangle, it is usually, so the socioeconomic structure and the enormous inequality is usually the reason why people flee, besides violence. So of course, violence and extreme socioeconomic inequality. And this can only be solved by political willingness. So I agree with Jose that the root causes of the humanitarian situations that we see now need to be traced back, sometimes a couple of centuries back. So this is not, so the extent in which humanitarian situations affect such large chunk of Latin American populations is new, but the root causes are extremely old. So we need to study them. This is what we need to look for. This is what we need to analyze in order to get solutions. And of course, like José said, any solution will be international, multilateral, regional, on the level of the regional bodies that we already have. So for example, Mercosur and other regional bodies. So this is these are my thoughts.
Yeah, Vences, I mean, as you touch on prevention, I mean, and I agree with you. I'm not. I think it's. I mean, in the seminar we have at the university, I always recommend colleagues, the students, to read a book which is called Who Killed Berta Cáceres? And it is a book written by a British journalist who was the correspondent of The Guardian for many years in Latin America, trying to describe all the complexities, interests. Mara mentioned the issue of ownership over land, territorial disputes, companies, massive multimillionaire projects exploiting natural resources. I mean, I just want to mention that because I think it's a book that shows you the microcosm of a region in Honduras, but it can be applied to any other country in Latin America today. I will put the reference in the chat. Sorry, Bella.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Alexandra Kirai.
So my question is in line with this. So I agree with that there should be regional cooperation, but I just had this thought that this problem of displaced people already spread to the majority of the continent, especially in Latin America. So these countries are struggling, I guess, alone to have resources to combat the problem within their borders. So how could be a regional response, a united regional response made if they are concerned mainly with their own situation, and maybe they don't have the resources, for example, to help Colombia with this situation because those resources are rather focused on within their borders because they also face this problem. So if you just could share your thoughts about that, I would be interested in it.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take the question?
Mara, please go ahead.
I couldn't unmute. Okay. So, for example, coming back to the example of the amnesty, many Latin American countries agree that regularizing migrants and refugees are an asylum seekers, whatever, so foreigners that are in their country not living regularly is of benefit for the country. So for example, I come from Argentina. Argentina is a net recipient of migrants since it exists as a nation. And many governments have had the political ideology that having migrants is positive for economic development, for social development, for cultural development. I am from Buenos Aires. Many of the most important institutions and hospitals and educational institutions were funded by migrants, for example. So I think that the ideology is already there. The ideology of Mercosur, for example, that is the regional body to which my country belongs, is that migration is positive, that regularizing migrants is what governments should do. And so they see migration as part of the solution, not as part of the problem. Of course, when we speak about Colombia and about humanitarian situation of such a broad, such a deep and difficult humanitarian, complex humanitarian situation, the solutions are not going to be the same as if we speak out maybe a more stable country. But from my point of view, at least from the ideological point of view and high-level political point of view, Latin American countries and government states already agree that this is, so migration is not a problem but a solution. Of course, from time to time, you have the right-wing or extreme right-wing government that scapegoats on migrants, and okay, like we all have that from time to time. But I would say that the general ideology is the one that I described before. I don't know if you say agrees with this.
I agree. No, I fully agree, Mara. I think it's a fact that migration is not in the region perceived as a threat. Migration is perceived as something that would contribute to development, to social development in the region. Of course, the challenge is to manage migration. The challenge I think countries are now facing and will continue to face, especially as we have this situation of forced migration taking place, is how to respond, how to manage it. And I think that the Colombian response in giving access to Venezuelans to a temporary protection regime with minimum rights, access to education, access to health, access to regular formal employment for a period of 10 years is a reflection of that. I think that, and I think as national authorities in the region continue to face these challenges, the responses we have seen are very pragmatic responses. I mean, it's there is an understanding, as Mara said, that not only that migration is positive, but that migration within the region is unavoidable. People will move. I mean, Venezuelans will move, Colombians are moving, Bolivians move, Paraguayans move, Brazilians move. I think that, as Mara said, the idea of the movement of people in the region is also an important chapter when you look at the region's agenda on integration. Even if that topic is not really there on the top of our regional leaders these days, but migration, I mean, the movement of people is there. I remember, for example, I think it was 2008 or 2009, when one regional organization in South America, UNASUR, one of the initiatives that UNASUR had was to establish a South American nationality. I mean, to start. I mean, it was, of course, I mean, a long-term project. I mean, decades, right? But it was discussed at the time by authorities. So just the fact that it was discussed, I think it has its merit.
Thank you very much. And time is running, so I think that we have still time for one or two quick questions if anybody has anything to add or to ask. I see the hands of Vences and Istvan. I'm not sure whether Vences would like to have another question, or is it still the previous one?
No, sorry, I had just forgotten it up.
Okay, good. So I give the floor to Istvan.
Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't abuse your precious time. Just one last question that I had in mind. It was about, again, this temporary statute of protection, that could it serve as a precedent for other countries? You have mentioned actually during your presentation as well that in Peru as well, they're counting about 1 million Venezuelans. Will they be applying the same method as their fellow Colombians, or how do you see that? Thank you.
Well, Istvan, it's a very good question. I mean, my answer would be hopefully so. Hopefully, states in the region would follow the initiative. I would even dare say that ideally, this temporary protection status. I mean, why not to think of a regional status? I mean, so I would even go beyond. But I think that hopefully states in the region will follow, as we discussed. I mean, bringing people to light is a positive step from the perspective of ensuring people have access to rights, ensuring people are not exposed to violations, exploitation, from that perspective, but also from the perspective of the legitimate security concerns a state would normally have. A state has the right to know who's here in my territory, who's this person, where was this person born, what is the biodata, what is the status of this person in my territory. So I would just say if other states in the region would like to copy that, to adapt, to adjust, I think that would be the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we have time for one more quick question. So who is going to be the last? Okay, last opportunity. Nobody's taking it. Okay, if not, well, last minute, Alejandra.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm from Mexico, and probably my question is a little bit linked with that relation, but in your perspective, what actions United States can implement in the region to help, especially in the topic of Central American migration, in the sense of prevention, of course, but also in the sense of Mexican politics and regional politics in the area? Is there like a direct relation, or what do you think can be implemented in that area, seeing US as the target country of most of the Central American migrants?
Mar, I think I was the last one who spoke, so maybe your turn.
Yeah, so this is a very complex thing to answer, but my answer would be that there are already many cooperations, and like what is the name of the main cooperation that the US has with the Northern Triangle countries? I don't remember the name now.
The plan for, well, I think maybe it was during Obama. They had the plan for prosperity. That was the name they used.
Yeah, so all the time the US has development plans that target the Northern Triangle countries. I don't remember the name of the last one, but there's a plan now too. The problem is that for as long as Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries continue to be countries of production and passage of drugs that go to the US, of course, the situation won't be solved permanently, let's say, because of so hundreds of thousands of people flying because of violence connected to drug trafficking. So this is a problem, like Jose mentioned, maras, gangs related to drug trafficking, and this can only be solved through a political decision. And the same thing, a regional political decision. So I think that the US is already doing a lot, but they are not really addressing the root causes. And when they try to address the root causes, it is through the war against drugs, and it is through violent means. So they do cooperation and they do violent responses. So both of them, just that they don't really address the root causes of the forced displacement. I mean, that is my point of view.
Anything to add, Jose?
I mean, I think, I mean, I agree with Mara. I think that regional cooperation, multilateral initiatives involving all countries in the region, trying to look at the problems, at the main causes for migration and displacement in Central America, and how to prevent at least displacement is essential. But I also think that, and that is a situation that is quite a dynamic one, and you have permanent demographic shifts in the past. I mean, migration towards the U.S. was mainly from Mexicans. So from Mexicans, we have now Central America. From single people, we have now families and children. And from those who would migrate because of economic reasons, we have now people being displaced not because they feel attracted by this attraction power the US exercises in the region, but they are also pushed by push factors in the country of origin. So I think that engaging, responding, initiatives like the ones Mara mentioned are a first step into the direction, and to answer to Alejandra's question on what can the US do.
Thank you very much. And we have a very last, hopefully quick question from Santiago.
Yes, I just wanted to add to both of the presenters' opinion. And I wanted to maybe talk about, when we talk about the roots of displacement, forced displacement, we need to talk about inequality and the lack of opportunities for jobs. And we need to talk about how many of the people who are forced to move are not only forced to move because of violence, but because they cannot eat, or they're in poverty. So many of these policies that have been taken by the states are not meant to fight the root of these causes, but are just meant to fight criminality and to keep on war policies and kind of these intervention policies on countries, rather than just fighting root causes, which can be distribution of income, solving inequality, giving more fair treatments in terms of treaties and business between nations, and non-intervention among many others. So I think, for example, in Colombia, Colombia Plan, which is a policy that's been fighting the growth and the distribution of cocaine and other drugs and narcotics. It's been helpless for 20 years. It's done nothing but to, in many times, worsen the violent situation in many places, or to even create more displacement. So I think the topic should be guided. How can we fight inequality? How can we give more education? How can we give conditions to the populations so they can be independent, so they can be autonomous, so they can grow their own food, so they can have their own territory? And that was about the contribution that I wanted to give. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santiago. And as unfortunately time is up for this discussion, with this I would like to thank the presenters and also the audience for being here with us today. And I will publish all the links. So I will be collecting all the links that Jose and Mara have posted to the chat. So these will be posted to the event site on Facebook. And also the video recording of this event will be published in the YouTube channel of the Latin America Research Center. And please stay tuned, because in late April, we will have another online discussion. We will have a Brazilian political scientist, Fabio Luis Barbosa, with us, who will be speaking about the dynamics of left-wing and right-wing parties in electoral politics. So that will be another interesting topic that we will discuss in the format of an online lecture. Actually, he's in Brazil, so this pandemic at least gives us the opportunity to invite people without actually having to come here. So we are trying to engage scientists and researchers currently living in the Americas as well for our forthcoming events. So thank you very much once again, Mara, José, and all the members of the audience for being with us this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for your attention.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you, Bella.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.